Author Rob Janicke is our guest to discuss his book Slacker, 1991, Teen Spirit Angst and the Generation It Created. Great to have you on, Rob.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate this opportunity.
There's a particular mixtape a friend of yours gave to you in 1989 that I think we can thank for this book being written, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, we can. And I thank him for kind of changing my life, actually, with that mixtape. I'm sure you and other great music fans can probably remember a time where, like maybe the light switch went off, right? Something just started to make sense musically. And that cassette changed my life because I was already listening to what I thought was very good music. I still love it to this day. I was listening to heavy metal. I was listening to punk rock, and some rap. I grew up in Brooklyn, so there was a lot of rap in the mid '80s that was happening in New York. But the mixtape, it sounded different. The songs were different. They didn't have the metal sound or the classic hard rock sound. It was something different about the music coming from this tape. And I don't know if it was my age at the time. I don't know if I had just listened to all the other stuff enough where I was ready for something new. But man, when I heard, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Violent Femmes, Sonic Youth, Jane's Addiction, all for the first time, I didn't know what any of it was. I didn't know.
Yeah, because it's a few years ahead of when these bands became big.
Yeah, and my friend Pat, and maybe you have one of these folks in your life, or maybe you're that guy for other people, but there was always somebody in a group of friends that just seemed to know, right? They just, for whatever reason, I don't know if and back then, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have very simple and easy ways of researching these things. And this guy just dug into magazines and into books and, independent film and documentaries, and he just found this stuff.
No, I had that guy. I wasn't the guy. I had that guy, my friend Chris, who was my roommate in college. And
Yeah.
I don't know how he knew about all these bands, but he knew about these bands. He knew about Nirvana. He had Nevermind before it blew up. He had The Cure. He loved Jane's Addiction.
Yeah.
Loved Jane's Addiction. Turned me on to them. And somehow he knew about these bands. I don't know how, but he was that guy that had all the cool stuff that was ahead of its time. And he also was that type of guy, like once they became popular, it bummed him out.
That's Pat.
Yeah.
That's my guy too. Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't like when it became commercial.
Yeah. Well, to put it in perspective a little bit, my friend at the time in the 80s, one of his favorite bands was Pink Floyd, but it was the Syd Barrett Pink Floyd.
Yeah, there you go. That's the other.
Yeah. So anything mainstream sort of lost its appeal for him after a while. He liked finding the odd, new, different sound. And back in the mid and late 80s, that's what this stuff was.
Tell us about the title of the book. What inspired that title, particularly the word slacker?
So I'm I guess people who know me well would call me sarcastic. I kind of like to jab people a little bit here and there. And slacker was a term that in the 90s, I say, Generation X, we were labeled as slackers, losers. I mean, look at Beck. Beck wrote a song called Loser. We had a generation above us that, for whatever reason, didn't think we were going to amount to much. And probably not across the board, but we heard it enough where it was a term, or terms like slacker were something we took to heart. So when I was writing the book, I didn't have a title. I tried a few different ones and I hadn't settled on one for a while. And I don't remember exactly when the name came to me. What I do remember, I had a list and I wrote down a bunch of names that could be titles, not just one word names, but just titles in general that might work. And slacker just happened to be one of them. And as time went on, I kept looking back at the list and I'm like, you know what? This is a slap in the face to all the people who thought we couldn't do anything. So I did it sarcastically. Like, yeah, here we are. We're slackers. We can't do anything. But look at what this generation did. And even in my little tiny part of the world, I wrote a book about it. So I guess we turned out okay.
I think we're almost exactly the same age. I was born in 72. I think
I
you're
was
born
born in
in
73.
73.
Yeah.
So we're right around that time. But yeah, that
Yeah.
slacker. I always think the first time I ever heard that was Back to the Future. You're a slacker, McFly.
That's right, right. And that was probably what, 84, 85, something
Right.
around that time. So the term had been around for a while and it was, pointed right at us. So
And you're the founder of Generation Riff. Tell us about the
yeah.
blog. When did you launch that?
So Generation Riff started, oh wow, in its earliest form, probably in 2015-ish, 2016. I had worked in corporate America after graduating college, but I was always interested in music and writing. It's something I had done for a very, very long time, but on a freelance basis. My very first real blog, I guess, it was a column for a website all the way back in 2003 or 2004 called The Truth Magazine. And I ripped off the title from a Fugazi album and I called it A Steady Diet of Nothing. And I just wrote about music. And so when this idea for a new blog came around, I was recently laid off from a job in the corporate world and I wanted to focus on writing again. And I was very in tune to the 90s, to our generation, Generation X. I listened to a lot of that music often, and I just wanted to write about it. And in my mind, the first thing that when you think about that time, it's guitar music. It's heavy riff guitar music, sort of like what metal or hard rock might be. So really, it's just a combination of two things I was thinking of when I wanted to start writing again about music. I wanted to write about my generation. I wanted to write about, music, and I just combined the two words, and it sounded okay to me, so I went with it.
Blogs are fun. I have a blog on the website, and there's no pressure to it. You just write it. If people connect with it, great. But if
Yeah,
not, it's still just the release of writing
it
about
is.
music that you love, you know?
Yeah, it's a nice outlet. Writing has always been that. I think for anyone who writes, I think it's an outlet. It's therapeutic. It's something that you can maybe look back on someday over time, even if a lot of people don't read it, or they don't connect with it. It's yours. You did that. Those are your words, your thoughts, and it's not a terrible way to, maybe get a little introspective and self-reflective. So I would encourage anybody, as long as you've got an idea and a story to tell, you could be a writer.
And as with writing songs, the best music, the best writing involves really opening up and being honest. And this is what you do in the book. It's very personal. It took me a long time to come to terms with the idea that not everybody connects with music the way you and I do,
Hmm.
in the way those who are listening right now, who listen to this podcast and music podcast. And it's covered in the first chapter. There's a wonderful story about this, and it all ties in with you becoming a parent of two, but
Yeah.
also my two of my all-time favorite bands, Blind Melon and Pearl Jam. Talk
Yeah.
about that first chapter.
Well, I have to give a little bit of, not a little bit, I have to give a lot of credit to my publisher and the editors because when I first sent in early drafts of the book, I was hinting towards some vulnerability. I was hinting towards some personal stories, but I wasn't going all out. And they can tell that when they were, they were able to sense that when they were reading what I was sending in. And they were like, "We see what you're doing. We know you want to go in a certain direction, but you're stopping short. Go. Just
Really?
tell."
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
holding
yeah,
back.
yeah, and tell the story. And once I heard that, maybe I just needed some confirmation from somebody else to do it. It opened up my ability to go a little bit further. And that's kind of where that initial story came from. The blind melon part, when I found out that we were going to have our first child, I panicked, like most first parents probably do for many reasons, right? It's a very scary, exciting, but scary time. But I did immediately go to thinking like, wow, okay, now I'm going to be responsible for this person, and I've got my own demons and my own things to deal with that I probably haven't really faced or faced enough for my own satisfaction, let alone somebody else's. So I need to figure this out. I need to get to a place where I'm comfortable being a parent the Blind Melon story, the song that I refer to in the book, and why I wanted to speak to Nico Hoon, Shannon's daughter in the first place. I wanted to convey that story. I wanted to talk about how, upon hearing I'm going to be a parent, I need to shape up. I need to change. I need to get a little bit better. And it was quick. It was a quick, like, okay, publisher says this is okay. They think I need to go a little bit further. They're probably right. And Blind Melon was the first band that came to mind because of I remember, thinking those thoughts when I found out we were going to have a baby.
And it's the Blind Melon song "New Life."
New Life, yes, yes. And
And
Shannon had obviously most people who are fans know he had a very difficult and life-altering drug addiction, which I didn't have, but we had two things that were gripping us,
well,
and
let's talk about that a little bit. What
yeah.
that being as a child, your parents divorced,
Hmm.
and that really hit you hard. And
It
we
did.
have that in common too. My parents divorced
Oh,
when I was
okay.
14, and that was tough.
Yeah.
That was tough.
It's not an easy thing to go through at any age. Every age has its own challenges. You were 14, so I would imagine, you just starting to become a man, a young man. And for that to happen at that point must have been devastating.
Had my first ever panic attack at my dad's apartment. Moved out of the house. He's in an apartment. Cardboard
Yeah,
boxes everywhere.
mine
Sitting on
too.
a lawn chair. Right, and you're just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then I said to him, I said, I'm not feeling something's weird. I feel weird, I think was the word.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
weird. Something's weird. It put doubt in your mind as to whether you wanted to get married, let alone have a child.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was only 5, and I have a younger sister, 2 years younger, so she was 3. And at that age, I just to fast forward just a bit so it's easy to understand. I have an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old, almost 9-year-old son, and I cannot imagine not being in their lives on a daily basis and seeing them grow and help them. When I was 5, I lost that. I didn't have that ability, as a father figure. My mom did the best she could, but suddenly we went from, a relatively normal working class family to a single parent household with a mother who didn't have an education necessarily, not a college one for sure, and had to go out and get 2 and 3 part-time jobs. And my sister and I were maybe not right then at 5 and 3, left to our own devices, but soon enough, while my mom was out working all the time. So I went from what I was told was a very happy little kid to someone who, by the time I was 9, was not thrilled with being alive anymore. And I expressed that to my mother, to her shock. She was like, "Oh boy, okay, we've got to fix this." And yeah, to your point about not wanting to get married, let alone have kids, it was because I saw nothing but failure, heartbreak, sadness, difficulty. It was tough. It was really, really rough. And on top of it, didn't have a good relationship with my dad after the fact. Like you can divorce, relationships end. We all know that. They don't always last forever. It's okay. But when children are involved and you don't do right by them, that changes everything, and
Yeah.
that's the kind of childhood I experienced with that situation. And so my mom put me in therapy at 9, which is wild to think now because
9. Yeah. I mentioned Pearl Jam. So there's a part of the story that has to do with Pearl Jam. That's a great story as well. If you could share.
yeah, the Mike McCready story you're
Yep.
referring
Mike
to.
McCready
Yeah.
story.
So this blew my mind, man. And as you know, because you're a tremendous music fan, music brings people together, right? And so I met somebody who lived in Seattle at the time. This was late 90s, early 2000s, through music. It might have been one of the fan club board, chat rooms or
I was on
chat
the
rooms,
yeah. I
things.
was on
Yeah.
the Cure. The Cure was it AOL or Yahoo? I can't remember.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
on
It
the
was all
Cure
right.
message board.
The
Yeah.
message boards that I was looking for it. I couldn't
Right.
find it. So a friend lived in Seattle, and over time, we really bonded over music, and Pearl Jam being the biggest for the two of us. As you may know, or it is in the book, Mike McCready has Crohn's and colitis. He has, very debilitating disease, and he is one of the spokespeople for that foundation nationwide, particularly in Seattle, of course. So every year he puts on this benefit, and you can get tickets to charity, and you can go and meet him, and it's a whole thing. And I was going to go. My friend who lived in Seattle, this was 2005, friend who lived in Seattle said, "Hey, just get a plane ticket, and I'll take care of the ticket for the event, and we'll do this." So yeah, definitely. Long story short, I got hurt in between agreeing to that and then the date of the event, and I had to have spine surgery. And I'm pointing to the top of my neck because it was up in the front. It was cervical spine. So I had this surgery, and then I had this big brace on, and it was a whole thing. And I asked my doctor, I said, "Hey, I have something in Seattle." I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and I said, "I have something in Seattle. Can I go?" Doctor's like, "No, you can't get on a plane. You're not, you just out of surgery. You have this thing on. You're not going. You're not flying." So I had to turn it down, unfortunately. The day of the event comes, the phone rings. I see the name on the phone is my friend Gwen. Wasn't going to answer it just because I figured like this is just going to bum me out.
Right.
And I do, and I'm glad I did answer it. I do decide to answer it, and it's a man's voice. And he says, "Hey, is this Rob?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Hey, bud, it's Mike McCready." Time stood still. And I didn't know what to do. And this is split second. It's a live phone call. So I was like, "Oh, hey, Mike. What's up, dude?" Like, you know,
The first thing that come out of your mouth is just that's it. It's like
yeah, we're lifelong pals. Um, so he goes on to tell me, he's like, "Hey, Gwen told me what happened, that, you had the surgery, and well, first of all, I hope you're okay. And I can't believe you were going to come out here all the way from New York." And we have this conversation, and it lasted about 10 minutes. And this is on a day where he has this massive responsibility for this big charity event. But he took time to call a fan who was going to come out and be a part of it. And we talked about music. We talked about, asked me how many times I'd seen the band live. Back then, I forgot what the number was, but now I'm up to about, I don't know, 32 or 33 times seeing
nice.
them. He asked me, what my favorite record was, and I think I said Versus. And he said, "Oh, well, then you're really going to like the new record." This was the Avocado record, the
Yeah.
self-titled one they were working on. It hadn't come out yet. And he said there's a lot of, harder, fast songs on it. And then phone call ends, and a couple of weeks later, I get a box. I get a package in the mail, and it was guitar picks, a couple of signed CDs, a pennant, like a baseball pennant, like a triangular flag that says Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, to Rob, get well soon, Mike McCready. Like, it was really, really cool. He was obligated to do none of that, and he went so above and beyond. It was great.
Yeah, I think he and the rest of the guys in that band, I think they understand the importance of music. They're fans as much as they are musicians who have fans. Always got that feeling. I think that's why they're still going strong today. I think they're pretty grounded, and they think they understand. They didn't let it get to their heads. They understand the power of music and what it does for people. It really, I can't imagine a day without music.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I agree with you about what you just said. I don't know what a day without music would be like. And also about Pearl Jam specifically. I remember I also went to their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction because it was in New York, and I went, and Jeff Ament was wearing a T-shirt that had the names of bands that hadn't been elected yet, or well, maybe will never get in, but a lot of his favorite bands you know. And Eddie's always talked about the Who and the Ramones and the Clash, and Mike with Iron Maiden and other bands, and they're all fans. They all understand the importance of music, and they now know, and they knew for a while, I'm sure, that their fans felt like that about them.
Mm-hmm.
So they felt that
Yeah.
responsibility. So you're right, and that's a lot of bands in the '90s. It feels like, to me anyway, they seem to have come at making music from a fan's perspective first. They loved it so much that they wanted to make it themselves, and then they respected how we felt about them. It didn't seem contrived, where coming out of the '80s, not all '80s, but what was popular seemed to be like, Is this really for us or for them?
Yeah, 1991 was the year. That's the year that everything blew up. That's the year that those who weren't living in Seattle discovered so many of these bands and the term grunge became popular. But this movement began back as far as 1984.
Yeah.
This is covered in chapter 2 and a band called Green River. Who is Green River?
So I started it in 84. I could have gone further back. I mean, you can go to the 70s Iggy Pop, Iggy and the Stooges maybe, or even the 60s garage rock bands for that visceral sound. But I started in 84 because, at least in Seattle, you had these guys and girls that were making this music underground, heavy, dirty, not really commercial, nothing like what was happening on radio at the time. So I felt like Green River, I had to start with them because Green River, the guys in Green River are like almost ground zero for the popular grunge movement because they became Mudhoney and Mother Love Bone, and then Mother Love Bone became Temple of the Dog and Pearl Jam, and the players, the pieces, if you will, that were in Green River really became, the launching off point, I think, for the popular grunge bands, at least early. And Jeff and Stone, from Pearl Jam were in Green River, and they then went on to form Mother Love Bone and the Pearl Jam, like I said. So it's I felt like it was the right place to start. And it was early enough because Soundgarden started in 84 also, but it was an early enough starting point, and I was hoping to convey this where nothing about grunge was an overnight success. Nirvana in 91, yes, seemed to come out of nowhere, but the seeds were planted long, long before, and I wanted people who maybe were casual fans of the era or new fans, like maybe young kids now, to read about some of the bands that didn't get the notoriety that some of the big bands got. Like you and I know Green River, right? But I don't know how many current 18-year-olds know who they are.
No, it's
So
interesting to see the latter half of the 90s where these bands were manufactured by labels, whereas these bands were organic. They were real. They
yeah,
formed out of just a simple love of music, whether it was growing up on Sabbath or early Aerosmith or garage rock or whatever it may be. And it became something all on its own. Soundgarden was always surprising when I heard that they go as far back as 1984. It's like, wow, that's really going back because that's what, good 6, 7 years before we start to see them on MTV. So these
yeah,
bands were, I would say they were probably settled with that reality that maybe we'll just keep doing this and just get by and somehow figure out a way to get 3 meals a day and pay the rent if we can. And then all of a
yeah,
sudden, because of Nirvana, that just
yeah.
blew the door open. Pearl Jam, actually, timeline wise, was Pearl Jam. Nirvana blew up in September of 91, and then Pearl Jam was what, by January of 92? Did they become? Because
Well,
I remember seeing the Alive video on MTV in my dorm,
mhm.
and I just don't remember if I saw that before. I think Smells Like Teen Spirit was a hit before that.
Yeah, if I and I'd have to look back, but the Pearl Jam 10 came out first. 10 was released before Nevermind, but only about within a month. But Nevermind hit first. 10 didn't make a lot of noise until Nevermind hit. But I think the video for Alive may have coincided with the video for Smells Like Teen Spirit, kind of right around the same time. So I don't think it's that far-fetched that I don't, you could have seen it. I don't know before. I don't remember the dates of the video shoots, but it was around the same time, I believe. And Nirvana kicking that door open, it did start not right away, but eventually it did because of it. Everybody then started looking back and seeing who was in that scene first, how all these musicians kind of like melded together. They all knew each other for the most part. They all played with each other in various bands or played on the same bills at shows. So once Nirvana became, the cultural phenomenon it did, everybody else then, started to get lifted up.
Well, this is a question I'm real interested in because I don't know how many people I've spoken to on the show. They're almost exactly the same age as me. We were old enough to be fans of bands in the 80s, and then all of a sudden this new wave of music comes in the 90s. What I mean is it took me a little while to embrace these bands because
Hmm.
I was still into the bands that I followed in the 80s. I was still into Def Leppard. I was still,
Yep.
still and still am to this day. Van Halen is an exception to the rule, but I was,
Yep.
still wondering what Cinderella is going to do next.
Right.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
still into that. Like Warrant had an album out in '91, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it had a song called "Bitter Pill," and it was on the radio. These bands were still getting on the radio. Mr. Big, "To Be With You" was
Yep.
a hit. So I really wasn't ready to embrace it. My roommate, as I told you, had all that stuff, and I was kind of like, oh, he used to make fun of Van Halen and David Lee Roth, but then it just you couldn't stay away from it. And then I remember one of the floor mates in my dorm had 10, and I said, you know what, let's just do it. So I got the CD 10, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it took me a long time to get Nevermind, to be honest. I got Pearl Jam's 10 first, and I became a Pearl Jam fan really first before Nirvana.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, once I grabbed onto it, then I was in. But I was still a fan of the bands of the 80s. So what was your process going in your head? Were you ready to just forgo all the bands that you liked in the 80s that may have been passé? Were you just still kind of following both? Were you
I
into
was
Winger and Nirvana?
Well, it's very funny. Like we did have similar paths because I was it prior to the tape we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, the mixtape that I got. Before that, I was listening to, like I mentioned, some metal, well, not some metal, metal, hard rock, all the way back to 60s, Beatles and Stones and The Who and all that.
Well,
But
you grew up on classic rock radio like I did, probably, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And had older cousins and people in my life who would, turn me on to like The Doors and, obviously Zeppelin and all the classics. David Bowie was a big one for me, but Bowie didn't fit into a category. He was just every album was different.
Yep.
But I did, Space Oddity was one of the first songs I remember really falling in love with, and it was in the early '80s that I found it. But Ozzy Osbourne, like I loved Sabbath, but Ozzy solo, I had, the records on vinyl up until probably Bark at the Moon. It was probably the last one because he had,
Hmm.
Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman,
No More
before that.
Tears was big in '91.
Yeah, No More Tears.
Yeah.
But by then, there like the change had already happened. But leading up to it, I mean, one of my favorite albums of all time was Pyromania. High and Dry, On Through the Night. I had all of that stuff. I had it on vinyl, I had it on cassette. So I did still like that. Then I was hearing some early rap, Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, Run DMC, LL Cool J, things like that. Where again, being in Brooklyn, it
Wu
helped
Tang.
because Wu-Tang, they were a little
Yeah. A
later,
little bit
but
later. Yep.
I was able to appreciate them because of some of that early rap that I had heard. Then the mixtape happens in the late '80s, and I did not throw away the earlier stuff. I just was more excited about the new stuff I was hearing, But I ne and oh, Motley Crue. Motley Crue was a big one for me too.
Hmm.
Shout at the Devil was one of my favorite albums.
Kiss.
Kiss, I never no, Kiss I
Oh, you
never
know
got
what?
into.
I know this because I heard you on abandoned albums with
Yeah, I never got
with
into
Keith.
Kiss.
Yeah, yeah. You guys, I think both were saying you're not a
Yeah, the thing
Kiss
about
fan.
Kiss, I was never like a horror movie fan necessarily or a comic book guy. So the look actually, I know the look brought in most kids our age. The look actually turned me off. It looked silly to me. So
Yeah.
I never took it seriously. But I did appreciate, I understood why everybody liked them. But and you mentioned another one that I loved Van Halen, still do. How do you not? Rush, like I still like a lot of that music. But I think I was ready, and again, I'm going to give credit to the tape for turning my ears on to something a little bit different. I was ready and excited for something new, but I did not throw the other stuff away. As a matter of fact, that's the reason I interviewed the comedian Don Jameson for the book, because he was one of the co-hosts of that metal show on VH1. And he was exactly like you. He said to me, it's in the book, he hated what happened in the early 90s because he blamed them. He blamed those bands for getting rid of all his favorite bands, which were all the metal bands and the hair metal bands. But then he goes on to say that I had to step back and listen. And when I would hear Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, he said, how could I hate this stuff? This is great metal. This is great heavy music. So some people, it was a blow. If you liked heavy metal, if you liked, what was popular in 88, 89, 90, and then this other stuff is taken over, it hurts, you know?
Yeah, you had to actually be like a closet listener of some of those bands, where a few
Yeah.
years before you could play it at a party, but
Yeah.
now all of a sudden you're going to listen to. I mentioned Winger. You're going to
Yeah.
listen to you're going to listen to Slaughter. But
Right.
I remember thinking, yeah, but I get it, but Warrant and those bands. I mean, there was a part of me that was kind of in on the laughter, like it was silly, but yeah, I just think it's interesting because our age, that's it's a weird period. It's a fascinating time to look back, just seeing it all happen before your eyes, just seeing everything change, culture
Yeah.
change, which is leads to the next question. The year 1991,
Yeah.
that year specifically, talk about that because in the book you explain why it's such an important year. It's one of those rare years when culture and music collide in a way
Hmm.
that we hadn't seen since late 60s.
Yeah. I think music and culture are always going to be attached at the hip. They inform, like, music informs culture, culture informs music. They are tied together. And I think and I don't remember the chapter, but I think the biggest shift, I mean, it's the chapter of 91, I believe, going into 92, but I don't remember the chapter number is what I'm saying. But when Nevermind knocked Michael Jackson's Dangerous off the out of the number one spot. It was January of 92. So 91 had completed itself. All of this new music was starting to take over. And the cultural significance of seeing Michael Jackson, who was in our lifetime, in our childhood, in our formative years, the biggest star on the planet. I mean,
Absolutely.
and it was not even if someone said to you back in 1983, 84, 85, whatever, that, Michael Jackson is going to get kicked to the curb by a couple of greasy haired punk rock guys from Seattle someday, you would have been laughed out of that conversation. And that's exactly what happened. And it was a sign of the times too. Like, the 80s was something out of indulgence and prosperity. There was a lot happening with the stock market, and the Reagan Thatcher thing was very prevalent. The political climate was all for these older people that we were growing up being controlled by. And it didn't resonate with us. And then the music was all happy and poppy and flowers and sunshine. That didn't resonate with us. So I think it was a perfect storm of many things that allowed this music to take over. And 91 really was 91, 92. We say 91 because that's when, 10 came out. Never mind. Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, Blood Sugar Sex Magic from Chili Peppers, the Black Album from Metallica. So many of these records came out in 91, but it was late for the most part, late in the year.
Late 91. Yeah.
Yeah. By 92, though, everything had really, really, really exploded. And 91 was just the year everyone referenced because that's when it all, really did come out.
Man, you're bringing, I'm just seeing it all in my mind now. It's taking me back to that was sophomore year. I went to Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven. And by the time we came back from Christmas break, it was like all of music and culture was grunge and rap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was like we went back to school in September of 91 and we're still kind of sort of still in the 80s, and then within 6 months
Yeah.
it's all great. And I was watching, there's a new special on Peacock, 50 years of SNL music.
Okay.
And there's that clip of Nirvana when they were on and Charles Barkley was the host,
Right.
right? And so they
Yep.
have some rare footage, and the footage is of the three guys, Chris Novoselic, Dave Grohl, and then Kurt Cobain. And they're just waiting, and you can hear the people in the background saying 3, 2, 1, and then it's that promotion that they would do during the week. You know, hey, this is Charles Barkley. I'm going to be the host of Saturday Night Live. My musical guests are Nirvana. And then you see the three guys just make the funny faces. And I'm looking and I'm like, wow, there's Kurt Cobain. Because now he's like a mythical figure. It's almost as if I watch him now and it's almost as if he didn't even really exist. Kind of like when we were that age and I thought about Hendrix or Morrison
Hmm.
and those guys, but we were there for it. We were there
Yeah.
when he was alive and it was happening and
Hmm.
people were talking about him, good and bad.
Hmm.
And it's hard now to wrap my head around that because it all just, that news came down in April of 93 that Kurt
90,
Cobain,
94.
94, that
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain committed suicide. It's like,
Yeah.
I remember where I was when that happened.
Yeah.
That's when everything changed.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. And that
They,
was
like, and you
our,
brought up a great point in the book. That's when everything changed in the sense that the labels were looking at someone to replace that. What's the word you use to describe them? Cash cow, right?
oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's manufacture
Yeah.
another cash cow. Like he's
Right.
the guy all the teenagers are looking to. So we have to replace him now, which is just so sick, you know? It's like
Well,
let's find some depressed 20 something
yeah.
and dress
Well,
him up and have him sound like Kurt and Nirvana, you know?
that
It's
that that is major label, major label business 101. It was never about the emotion. It was never about the connection. It was about what's going to bring in the most revenue. And they felt that, okay, we have to cash in on this because the guy we were using is obviously never going to do it again. So we have to find his replacement immediately. But they didn't understand that it wasn't just the sound of the music, it was the connection that he made and that band made and other bands made with the fans. You can't recreate that. They came from an organic place, a place that was not created. And then later on, people were trying to create, the replacements of those people. And you made a really good point about that we grew up in a time where he was alive and doing these things, and we got to watch it in real time. And I think that's part of his mystique. You know, when you hear his name, I know when I do, the only thing we can see is a 26, 27, maybe 24, 25-year-old, depending on when you first found them, young man with his face, the way he looked, his hair, his clothes. He never got old.
right.
He never got to get old. So we can't see him like when I hear Mick Jagger's name, I don't think about 60s Mick Jagger because I wasn't alive. I think about the 80-year-old guy I see now on the news. And it's okay. He's amazing and he's still doing it, but that's not like Cobain's myth. Part of it is because he's frozen in time as a kid, essentially.
Like Marilyn Monroe, like
Correct.
Hendrix, like Jim
Yep.
Morrison.
The 27 Club. Yeah.
Yeah, what was your first impression of Smells Like Teen Spirit when you first heard it or saw the video?
It blew me away. I think the video had more of an impact. Not, I shouldn't say more of an impact. It had a different impact on me. I thought the song was amazing the first time I heard it. There was this, well, I guess it's kind of familiar because, the main guitar riff is essentially More Than a Feeling from Boston. Like, so
Yeah, I
we
didn't know
kind
that
of,
until years later.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, I
right. It
hear
was
that.
a
Yeah.
bit of an earworm. Like we kind of knew it. It felt familiar, but in a different
Interestingly
way.
enough, though, right, there's classic rock radio staple,
Yeah.
Boston,
Mhm.
More Than a Feeling.
Yeah, and Kurt was a pop music fan. He was a hard rock fan, a punk fan. He liked the Beatles. I mean, there was no end to his music fandom, and that all became part of his influence when he was writing. But the song blew me away. It just, it's that Pixies thing where it's the soft and the heavy, the slow, the fast, that dynamic that really does something to you when you hear it because there's that anticipation. You know something big is coming and you get ready for it. And then they deliver. They absolutely deliver on the promise. The video, though, to me, was the thing that really captured what teenagers and young people were feeling at the time. It was dark, it was dingy. We wanted a release. Kids are crowd surfing, moshing. It was like decadent. I don't know. The visual matched the song perfectly. It's probably the most iconic video. Maybe that and Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller. Those two videos might be the two most iconic videos of my lifetime. or in all of our culture from our generation.
The beginning of the song, it starts heavy. Well, it starts off with the riff, but then it gets
Yeah.
heavy. But I remember the part that really pulled me in first, looking back, that's why it works so well on the radio is, and this is why Kurt was so great. When you get into that, the bass line, bow
Yeah.
down, doom, 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 bow down with the guitar.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it was going to blow up like it did, which I asked you the question is, why do you think Nirvana? Why did Nirvana have the most impact than other bands?
Well, not to diminish them, but timing played a huge role because they were signed to Geffen and there was a little bit of buzz with them. Not a ton because all they did is I think Geffen pressed about 60,000 CDs, like the first batch of CDs it was only 60,000 of them. But they thought that, okay, here's this new band. They have a little buzz out of Seattle. We're gonna market them. There's new money behind them with Geffen, and we're gonna try and make this work. So that had something to do with it, the timing as well, both in terms of when they released their record and what was happening, again, culturally, like we were talking before, kids just ready for something different. But my next answer, I think, is, and I don't know if I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain it the way it sounds in my head, but Kurt was one of those figures that everything just seemed right. His look, his voice, you can almost see the hurt and the pain and the vulnerability in him, whether it was the way he dressed, the attitude on his face, the snarky look he would have sometimes. There was just something about him. You ever meet somebody and you're like, well, I don't really know why, but there's something about that dude or that girl. There's just something that you can hone in on, like that person's gonna do something. I don't know. Kurt just felt like that to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the interviews that he did also played a big part of it. Thankfully, he did do interviews because
Yeah,
he was always fun to watch in interviews, but
yeah,
he was self-deprecating. He didn't think he was all that much,
yep,
but he had that snarky humor,
yep,
and there
yep,
was something there that, along with the music. But I've said back at that time, the joke was, what is he saying? Nobody could really
right,
understand the lyrics, and it didn't matter because you're feeling that angst, like whatever that rage you had inside you as a 19, 18, 19, 20 year old.
yep.
I felt it when he sang.
Yo, absolutely. I did too. And I think
I still do today when I listen to it. That youthful angst and rage comes out of me. Sometimes I feel like it takes me back to that time.
yeah,
Where am I going
it,
with my life and all of these things that are swirling around in your late teens, early 20s brain,
yep,
you know?
yeah, no, absolutely. And there was a quality to whether you want to call it his voice or his cadence, like how the words came out, how he presented his lyrics. It was perfect. Like the timing, the punch. He knew when to, accent certain words or when to use that gravel, when to pull back on it, when to get soft, when to get loud. It was an eight. It was an eight for him. It was intuitive. It was something that a lot of singers just don't have. And chemically, whatever music does to us from the inside out, he struck those chords. And you're right about the lyrics. A lot of them. Now, some of his songs obviously tell stories, but he admitted in interviews that sometimes he just strung words together that sounded good. Just the sound of the words and how they fit into the
Sure.
structure of his melody. So it didn't really matter. It's the way he delivered them that made you feel the way you felt. And another thing about Smells Like Teen Spirit specifically that I love, and I think one of the reasons it resonated so much when you asked before about why that song. Now, you mentioned Van Halen earlier, and obviously Eddie Van Halen was probably the greatest guitar player of all time. But when you listen to the solo in Smells Like Teen Spirit, the solo is the vocal pattern. It's the
Yeah.
vocal line. And to me, anytime a song does that, it just enhances and reinforces what you like about it. So it's almost like, oh, he's not singing anymore, but he's playing what you like and what has grabbed you. It never ends. The song, like the great part of the song never ends. Does that make sense? Like when
Yeah,
I say,
well, to that, I've had more and more of an appreciation of him as a guitarist over the years because I needed to distance myself from this idea that you had to be technically proficient to be
yeah,
a quote unquote good or great guitarist. But yeah, you're right. What he did with the guitar, just having that as the solo,
yeah,
and the riffs that he that he came up with, they're damn good. I mean,
Yeah.
again, technically proficient. No, but that comes from like the Neil Young school. I mean, Neil Young, great guitarist, not technically proficient.
No.
It kind of brought us back to that because it went way too far. Even Eddie himself used to say, "Don't blame me, man. This was this came naturally to me.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't intend for all these guys now to ape my solos and try to
Right.
look like me and sound like me and play a ton of notes and do that whole look what I can do with my guitar thing." And so he brought it back to really what the essence of the guitar was. Like, go back to Chuck Berry and those guys, and those riffs they're iconic, but again, technically proficient. No, I mean, rock and roll's about feeling. So
Absolutely.
that's why I love Eddie so much. Is yeah, he can blow you away with the things he could do technically, but it's still at the heart and soul of it is that you're feeling something from the music that he wrote.
Right. And that was Eddie's genius. Eddie Van Halen had the ability to play incredibly well, better than just about anybody, probably, technically. But he had feeling, he had energy, he had a vibe that you couldn't. I would hear and read interviews with other guitar players who were lucky enough to play through Eddie's rigs and with Eddie's guitar, and they would say it sounds nothing like him.
Right. Yeah.
And Eddie would say, yeah, because it's in the fingers. It's
Yeah.
just it's the person. So Kurt didn't have to be, or Neil Young didn't have to be. They didn't have to be technically proficient. They just had to understand energy and pass that energy on to the listener. And once you do that, you are an incredible songwriter, whether you understand music theory or not, whether you can run up and down, the neck at lightning speed or not, doesn't matter. If you put energy and feel into what you're doing, you're gonna have a fan for life.
You got to give credit to punk rock too. Punk rock, Kurt was talking about this in an interview that's on YouTube, where punk rock gave him the confidence to actually try it, try
Yeah,
becoming a musician, because that he realized that anybody can really play the guitar. It's how you play it.
yeah,
So that was huge. That was the punk rock attitude. The track that you picked from Nevermind, I thought was interesting. It's not any of the songs that were hits.
yeah,
It's Lounge Act, which is a great
yeah.
song. Why that particular song?
So Lounge Act to me was always, and it's one of the songs that we were just talking about it. So it's not the song, but my answer. It's energy. It's a feel. There's nothing special about that song technically. It's kind of a straightforward, run of the mill hard rock slash punk rock song, however you want to describe it. But if you listen closely, there's tension starting from the beginning and it slowly starts to build. By the time you get to that last verse where he's screaming essentially the same exact lyrics he did in the previous verse with the same vocal pattern and melody, but there's such an angst to it and there's such a release from the slow climb, the slow, steady climb of that tension. He finally pays it off in that last verse. And the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, how do you take such a simple song, I don't want to call it a throwaway song, but such a, good, simple song and put that much feeling into it just by increasing the tension a little bit. That's how when I first heard it, that was my take. It was like, this is what this band is about. This
Yeah.
band understands how to deliver energy more than what I'm used to hearing.
I
And I
think
think,
that hopefully helps for those who may not understand why Kurt is so respected. Is I think that may help to understand because his songwriting, he's telling a story,
yes.
sonically telling a story, not necessarily maybe through the lyrics. Yeah, but he's the push and pull, the tension,
Hmm.
what's coming next. I have to believe that that's part intentional on his part, but also just something that just was innate, like just something that he had. This is a gift
Yeah.
that he had.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I think there was some intention, but I think the intention comes from the fact that he knew that that was good music.
Right.
All of the years of him listening to the Beatles and then the punk rock stuff he listened to, hearing the catchiness, knowing you can make something heavy and aggressive but still make it catchy, knowing when if he would have in Lounge Act, if he would have sang the entire song the way he sings that third verse, it wouldn't have been good. Or if he never added that part at the end, it wouldn't have been that great of a song. He did it once. He only, you know what I mean? Like he
Yeah.
gives you the one payoff and that's enough for the song. So he knew when in a song, or even maybe like I said in the solo of Teen Spirit, like instrumentally, he knew whether his voice or the instrument, he knew when to give you, you know, your money's worth.
I don't know if we credit him or Butch Vig, the producer, but the other thing is the harmonies, like on a plane,
Yeah.
you know, and I love that it ends where they just isolate that. Ooh,
Yeah, it's great.
ooh. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't know whose idea that was, but
I think, and I could be wrong, but I do remember in research and just knowing stuff from just being a fan and reading and watching, Kurt wasn't all that crazy about the idea of those kinds of like, you know, he liked harmony because, like I said, he likes the Beatles, he likes pop.
oh, I think I
Uh,
know this story.
yeah, but he also wasn't crazy about the idea of doubling his vocals. And Butch is the one, according to Butch, that got him to do it because he told him that John Lennon did it. And
Yes,
when,
that's
you know,
that's the deal breaker there.
I mean, if you're a musician and you find out John Lennon liked something and did something, and you're in that same vein somewhere in that world, you're gonna do it.
That's what
You,
makes a great producer, right?
yeah,
How do we get this guy to do it?
yeah,
Okay, he loves John Lennon. Let's go with that. It worked.
yeah. Yeah. And as stubborn as Cobain seems like he could have been at times, and as snarky as we were saying before, when Butch told that story, it didn't seem like he gave him much of a pushback. It's like, okay, Lennon did it. I'm in. I'm in.
You know, it's good to see this music's lasting effect is evident in some of the younger people now because in the book you do talk about this Instagram account, Grunge Bible. Is it Chris Solona?
I've
Or
always pronounced it with a C, like cell. Yeah.
and let's see, he's got a friend, Ethan Shalloway too. They
Yeah.
both run this.
Yeah.
Olivia Rodrigo, who by the way is really, she's good, man. I like
I
her.
love her.
She
I think
was
she's great.
yeah, she was a follower at one time.
Yeah.
What is Grunge Bible?
Grunge Bible is, wow. Grunge Bible is necessary. I'll start off by saying that. And I love that it's from guys that age and not guys our age because they discovered the music. And I talked to Chris about this for the book. They discovered it mainly because they liked it sonically, they liked what they heard. But when they started reading comments that people were leaving on YouTube videos or whatnot, and they saw that songs from that era, and I think Chris was talking about Release from Pearl Jam, when they would see what these songs meant to people as they were leaving these comments, and people would talk about real personal things, it made them dive in so deep to the entire era and all the other bands and start reading lyrics, start reading about the lives, the childhoods, the upbringings of the musicians, and they got it. They understood. They felt, even though they weren't there, these are 20 something year old kids, they were not there when this happened. They were not alive. Chris was born, I think, 2 years after Cobain died. I think he was born in 96, he said. But they got it for the same reasons we got it when we heard it live. And for them to have figured that out on their own, I think Grunge Bible is serving a huge service to the era, to the musicians, but for all the right reasons. It's the connection to the music that I guess they haven't found within their own generation.
I'm a follower now. It's up to how many followers?
Oh man, I think they're approaching 1 million. I don't know what I think it was over 800 something thousand when the book was printed. It's probably higher than that now, I guess. I don't know, but it's up there. It's really high. I think it's by far the number one grunge related account on Instagram that doesn't belong to a band.
I'm glad you mentioned when it was printed. When it's out in June?
So it's out, yeah. So global distribution is June 3rd. So it's
Okay.
up on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, all the places you can order online for global distribution to ship on June 3rd. But you can get an early edition, an early release copy now through my website. Those are all signed and dedicated to the person who buys it. Once it's going from Amazon, I have no control over that. But it'll
All right.
always be up on my website so
All
people
right.
can get it there too.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Just a few more questions for you, and then we'll go over the details on that. But by the way, there's my signed copy right there.
Ah, there you go. My chicken scratch. Yeah.
Nice. So as we move out of 1991, we see grunge blowing up. Pearl Jam's Versus, the follow up to their debut 10, huge record setting. It sold 950,378
Crazy.
copies exactly in week one alone, nearly 1 million in 1 week. That kind of attention was getting to be too much for Eddie Vedder and Kurt Cobain. You say that both bands intentionally changed the production on their second album from Nirvana, it was In Utero. These albums were out in 93, and as we know, Kurt wouldn't live to see beyond the year 1994. His suicide, April 8th, 1994. Was the enormity of his fame too much for Kurt, or is that too simple of a way to put an answer as to why?
I don't think it's too simple. I think the answer is yes, it was too much for him, but there's a lot of factors that equal why it was too much. But yeah, the overriding factor is it was. He look, I can't speak from a drug addict's point of view because luckily I've never gone down that road. I don't know what it can do to your state of mind, when especially when you're already feeling a ton of pressure and a ton of anxiety and a ton of sadness or unhappiness, and then you throw drugs on top of it. But everything you read about him and heard about him, parts of him wanted the fame. Like there was always this dichotomy with him and what he claimed he didn't like and what he wanted. Those close to him said, yeah, he wanted to be a rock star. He wanted his band to be big. I don't know why you wouldn't. If you're playing music, you want people to hear as many people to hear it as possible. But being in your earlier mid 20s and you cannot leave your house anymore, you can't go outside by yourself, you can't walk into a store, you can't do anything without throngs of people throwing themselves at you. I can't imagine what that does to your psyche,
To be
you know?
famous when you want, when it's beneficial to you, that'd be nice, but not, you don't pick and choose.
No.
So
And
you're
this,
feeling like you're in a shitty mood and somebody's coming up to you and they want something from you,
yeah,
a complete stranger, or on the reverse, he had a lot of people that hated him, just simply jealous, pissed
yeah,
off that he
yeah,
destroyed all the bands that this dude loved.
yeah,
And they're
yeah.
blaming him, you
As if he
know?
had anything to do with,
Right?
the
Yeah.
millions of people buying the record. He didn't know.
It's just screwed with his head, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, how can it not? Look, you and I are in our early 50s and we come from similar backgrounds. Like we've gone through a lot of things. But I'd like to think we're smarter and wiser and more put together now than we were in our 20s. Well, we didn't face anything like that insane amount of attention. So just try to get through your 20s and your childhood by itself is tough. And then you add on this level of fame that is, I mean, they were prisoners.
Didn't have
They
time, it didn't slowly develop, just
no,
literally overnight,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Their rise was, even though they were a band for a long time, they went from obscure to, world famous seemingly overnight. I remember you mentioned Versus. I remember an interview, I think it was on MTV, I think, that Jeff Ament Pearl Jam did talking about the album, and they asked him, "What do you think of the reception to Versus so far?" And it was just as the album was released. And I remember him struggling with the answer, and he finally said, almost a million people listening to your songs in 1 week. He's like, I don't even know. I can't tell you what that is. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around a million people listening to the songs we just played and put on tape and put out there. Like, and you saw it in his face. You saw he was distraught. He was like, what does this even mean? You know,
Yeah.
you can't even count to a million. How long would it take to count to a million? Like
Yeah.
it's just a giant number.
Prior to that, they'd be playing gigs and they could count the people in the room and probably would remember them each time they played because they came back and would see him again. Now,
Yeah.
1 million people.
Yeah. And
Just,
when we were younger, I remember my group of friends, we were all a little too quick to judge what these guys were doing. Like, Eddie walked around 94-ish. Well, no, not ish. Around 94 when Vitology came out, and even a little before that probably. Eddie was wearing a mask. You saw pictures of him walking around wearing a mask, like a clown mask, which is odd, obviously. And his behavior was weird, and he was drinking a lot. And I remember years later he was talking about it, and he's like, I didn't know what I was doing because I was just trying to get the hell away. I was trying to escape. We weren't prepared for this, and young people do strange things when they're facing something that they don't know how to handle. That's human nature.
I would think that both Kurt and Eddie Vedder were and are introverts.
Yeah, you
You know
would
what I
think
mean?
so.
I mean,
Seems that way.
I'm an introvert and I go to movies every weekend. And I don't know if this may sound strange to those who are introverts, it won't. I go to movies by myself and I love it. I
Yeah.
mean, because I could just shut out the world and I'm just there by myself, lights out. And I wonder what that would be like where suddenly one day I can't do that anymore because I walk into the movie theater and all of a sudden all these people are staring at me, coming up to me, asking for an autograph,
Yeah.
spitting in my face because they hate me, and then another
Yeah.
person loving me and they have no idea who I am. So it's all just rock star adulation. I love you. Yeah, right. You don't know who I am.
You don't,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
having that disappear and not being able to do that. So then now it's like, okay, I guess I'll just have to stay inside all the time.
yeah,
You know, and there's a part of me, I guess, like everybody, you want a little bit of adulation, or you want people to recognize you, you want people to say, hey, man, I love your work. But again, you can't turn that on and off. You can't shift gears and decide, you know what, today I don't feel like being famous.
yeah,
I just kind of want to just, I don't want anybody to know. It doesn't work that way. So when so, because a lot of people say, oh, well, woe is me. They're famous. They're rich and famous. Give me a break.
yeah.
But
I know.
with everything in life, it's just it's like everything just ends up balancing itself out, like pluses and minuses. Then they have to realize this ain't going away. So I'm gonna have to embrace this. And again, going back to Pearl Jam, credit to them, they're grounded. But Eddie Vedder particularly had to embrace it and deal with it.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
did.
oh, no. He did, and he came out the other side, and he has two daughters, and seems like his life is in relatively good order, and that's great because a lot of people with that kind of fame, they don't lead normal lives or seemingly normal lives, and some of them don't even make it. I mean, he just turned 60, I believe,
Hmm.
and some people don't make it that far in that world. You know, it's unfair, and it's a shame that when someone wants to give something to the world, whether it's music, art, writing, you name it. Just be vulnerable, give something. If that's your purpose and you want to give something to the world by releasing it, it's a shame that there has to be ridicule that comes with it. And I don't mean critiquing. Critiquing is great, right? People can say, hey, I like what you did, but I didn't like this part, or it's not really for me, but I see where you're coming from. Great job. Like it's never that. We live in this black and white world where, like you said, I love you or I hate you.
Right.
And that shouldn't be the case. And for people to even, the times we live in now with the internet being what it is and technology being what it is, we can all put stuff out whenever we want. But the world it's very cluttered, and people have to, they're not going to find us necessarily the way the world found Nirvana at the same time. We don't live in a monoculture anymore. There's lots of things happening all at once. But when something does break through, I don't know, were we doing all of this so that can happen? Were we trying to become the most famous people in the world? I don't think so. And even if we were, how could we possibly process how to handle that
Right.
before it happens? You can't. And that's what these guys had to go through. It reminds me, this part of the conversation reminds me of the song by Tool, Hooker with a Penis.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
yeah,
What a
great
title.
song. Great, great, great. Yeah, great. Especially when your kids are in the car and the things are going.
Right.
Um, but there's a line that Maynard has in it. All you know about me is what I sold you. His point is exactly what we're talking about right now. Like we don't know these people. In
Right.
in your example, the people coming up to you, they wouldn't know you. They know what you gave them. They know what you told them. It doesn't mean they know you. And fans, admirers, haters, all together, they don't care about that. You know, it's more of their self gratification that they want to approach you and say something to you than how that might make you feel. They don't care about that.
There's a great scene in the movie. It's the movie with De Niro and Jerry Lewis. De Niro plays this psycho fan of Jerry Lewis, who's
Okay.
he's like a Johnny Carson type guy. He has a late night show,
Mm.
and but there's a scene in there. It's brilliant. Jerry Lewis is crossing the street and he's in the city, and this old woman stops him.
Morris, you will not believe who's coming down the hill. Jerry Langford, right?
Right.
Oh, Morris, please hold on. Jerry, would you please sign my sign my magazine for me?
Yeah.
You're just wonderful. I've watched you your entire career. You're a joy to the world. Please, Morris, would you just please say something to my nephew Morris on the phone? He's in the hospital.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
You should only get cancer. I hope you get cancer.
It's that quick that somebody can turn like that, you know?
Yeah. Famous people to non-famous people, famous people aren't people,
Right.
right? They're these things that are there for our entertainment. And if we happen to run into them, they have to entertain us, you know? And it's not like that. It's tough. And these guys went through it big time back then. And it
Yeah.
was so quick, insanely quick.
So let's wrap it up again. Let's talk about where people can get that autograph copy. You have a website.
Yes. So the website is simply my name. It's robjanicke.com. That will always remain open for the book. If you want a signed copy delivered now, you can go there. And that's in the US only. It doesn't ship internationally. The Amazons and Barnes and Nobles of the world online, June 3rd, that's when you can get it anywhere in the world, and they will not be signed, but more people can get it that way. So that was fun for us to find out. That wasn't supposed to happen until the end of the year, and we found out that it's going to happen relatively quickly. Like the pre-order is now, so you can do that now if you're anywhere in the world, and you'll get it starting June 3rd.
Well, congratulations on the book. It's a great read for those who are a fan of this era, but also interwoven throughout is your own personal story. And that's what makes it very special. So congratulations on the
Thank
book.
you.
And I want to thank Keith from Abandoned Albums because he was able to set this up. So
Yeah,
thanks to our buddy
absolutely.
Keith. So, and he did it.
Keith's a great guy, and he does. He's one of the true music and art fans out there. He's a
Hardcore.
great dude. Yeah.
Hardcore. Yeah. Rob Janicke, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate it. It was fun.